am a fiend addicted to podcasts. I love them,
Me
and I
too.
really enjoyed your podcast.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
I got into it. I was listening in the car. I was listening everywhere. It's awesome. Why did you decide to do that accompanying podcast with the novel?
Well, first of all, like you, I'm a podcast junkie. So I listen to loads of podcasts. And I'd never seen anybody do it. I realize now I think there are a couple, but I'd never seen anybody do it for a fiction book. And so I was talking to my publishing house one evening right after the book came out about how much of my research ended up on the cutting room floor. That book could have been a trilogy, easy, because both of their lives are so rich and fascinating but nobody wants to wait 3 books to see Lewis say I love you to her, right? So I couldn't write a trilogy. Nobody would have waited that long or read all 3 of them. They would have given up. So I was so kind of in despair about all the research on the cutting room floor that didn't end up in the book, because the other touchstone that I had to keep going back to over and over was that if a scene or a piece of research didn't touch the live wire of her transformational journey, it didn't get to stay. So I lost all these interesting things I learned because they were interesting for me, but you would have lost the thread of the story. And it was a long enough book as it was. So we started talking about what to do with that information. Do I write a nonfiction book about the lessons that Joy taught me? Do I write like a kind of like, this is the backstory, kind of small, slim volume that you could accompany it? And then I said, I'm a podcast lover. I think we should do podcasts. And they were like, ding, 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 ding. So I gathered the 7, 8, 9 people that I talked to when I was doing my research, or that I talked to after, and then ended up changing a few things. And so I dove into a lot of things that aren't in the book, but are really interesting. And I talked to 2 of the podcasts are with her son. One is with the man who is the expert on those love sonnets. And I did not talk to him till the book was done. I read his books, his 2 published books about her poetry. So I read his books, and I interviewed him on and off by email, but I never spoke to him voice to voice until we did that. And that's one of the few podcasts that was done face to face in a studio. We were looking at each other doing that. So it's one of my favorites. But yeah, and then there's a couple women who are experts on the women in Joy's life, including Dorothy Sayers, who is another amazing and fascinating woman. Taught herself Italian so that she could translate Dante. And she's just unbelievable. And it is said that Douglas said he only saw C.S. Lewis cry twice. Once was when Dorothy Sayers died, and once was when his mother died. So when Joy died. So we talk about Dorothy Sayers, and then we talk about his mother, how fascinating she was. So the podcast was just this grabbing of information that's wove into the story, but we could dive a lot deeper in the podcast. And I'm so glad you enjoyed it, because I think it makes the book more interesting. And I think it spreads, if you have any interest in knowing more about Lewis or her, that's a great